Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Witt. Thank you for joining us for this conference and the final session. It's my pleasure to introduce Amy Radin. Our closing session is How Finance Can Enable Innovation. Amy, following a successful business career in the corporate world, is now an independent advisor, a board member, including Fast Company board, and she's an at-large member of the AICPA board, and she is also an author. She's the author of the Changemakers Playbook, How to Seek, Seed, and Scale Innovation in Any Company, which is the winner of a Book Excellence Best Business Book Award, and she's going to share with us some insights from that book. So without further ado, turn it over to Amy.
Hi. Hi. So I am the closer, and I know how hard it is to hang in there after 3 days at a conference, and you're probably eager to get to the pool, get to the airport, get to the slot. So really appreciate to have such a great audience here, and I'm sure a great audience online as well. So for those of you who took a look at my bio, and also we all heard Ken's introduction, you probably have figured out that although I spent a long career in financial services, working for some pretty prominent companies, I'm actually not a CPA. In fact, I was not the best accounting student in graduate school, but have come to really appreciate the importance of accounting and finance professionals in my being able to do the kind of work that I do. People like me sometimes in our encounters with our finance colleagues, and I'll tell you, but hopefully be some memorable stories throughout this talk, I think some of them used to think that they were there to protect the organization from people like us, but in fact, what came to pass was a deep belief on my part and the part of the teams I've always worked with that in order to advance innovation, that partnership is really essential. So that's why I'm here today and looking forward to talking to you about it. But before I get there, I want to tell you a little bit about my history and some of the background that led me to this stage. I grew up in a family business. My dad was Harold, and he owned Harold's Pharmacy, which is a drugstore in Gravesend, Brooklyn, for those of you who know Brooklyn. And the whole family, me and my 4 siblings, were frequently conscripted to work in the store. Usually he got us to do the things that he could not ask his union employees to do. So that was fun, and at the time, I have to say, I didn't really love it, but looking back, I really got a lot out of it, probably as much as I got out of my MBA. And the best part of working in the store was when he had us work behind the counter, which was right opposite the door. And you'd have around 10 seconds to determine when somebody came through the door what they might need and if they were coming straight for you. So it was really my first exposure to understanding how do you deal on the fly with meeting a customer's needs. And also, it was the place where I had my first lesson in market segmentation. Because at Harold's, our customers were a combination of, on the one hand, blue-collar Italian immigrants, literally some of them straight off the boat from Italy, and on the other hand, very wealthy Middle Eastern transplants who were living in mansions that were a little too close together on this beautiful boulevard, again, for those of you who know Brooklyn, called Ocean Parkway, that runs through the borough. So a lot of lessons there. And looking back, I think what I really developed an appreciation for, although again, I didn't realize it at the time, was how hard it is to operate a business. How hard it is to understand and deliver upon your customers' needs. How hard it is to hire and retain, and when you have to exit employees. And how hard it is to bring together what you're trying to accomplish at work with your goals for your family or whatever you're doing outside of work, at the same time satisfying whoever your shareholders were, whether it was my mom, who's the CEO of the company, and at the same time manage risk. So those principles really apply today to all of you, no matter what business you're in, no matter what state or country you're in, no matter the sector, the size, the life stage. All of those issues are the issues, right? The question is, the issue today is there is so much more complexity, and the need for speed and very precise decision-making is so much greater. And in the middle of all that, what I really saw in my corporate career and what I continue to see now as I work with startups and with the AICPA as a board member is a real need for an elevated contribution to the finance function. So I think you all have incredible opportunity in terms of being able to contribute to your businesses and also to advance your careers. But really time to embrace change and playing that different role. Oops, got to advance. Okay, so on the other side of my corporate career, I decided to leave. I wasn't having fun anymore. I was like, what do I do now? And I decided to write my book, The Changemaker's Playbook. And writing a book is kind of a crazy thing. But this friend of mine had planted a bee in my bonnet. A guy named Kevin, who's a journalist, and he's written a bunch of books. And he said to me, you should really write a book about innovation. I'm sitting in my backyard. I had left my job. I didn't know what I was doing. And so I started to talk to authors who had written business books to figure out, how much work is it? How do you do it? What's the business model? How do you publish? All that stuff that you would want to know. And talked to a bunch of people. And one of my author friends, he said to me, Amy, there's only one reason to write a book. And that is if you think you have something to say. By the way, you will never make money writing a book, because there are so many toll takers. The author is at the total end of the food chain, and he was definitely right about that. You have to do it, but I really felt I had something to say. And what I wanted to say was, going out and looking at all the thought leadership on innovation, God knows the world doesn't need another book on innovation, right? There's tens of thousands of books. But they're all academic, theoretical, coming from people who had never been in a real operating role. And I said, there really is a space for somebody to put together practical advice on how do you get from that raw insight about a market need and something you want to do to serve your customers or advance your business, all the way to something that can scale and be viable. And that's what I understood. And so using my own experience and tapping into the knowledge of about 50 experts for all kinds of companies, because I think the principles, again, apply any place, I ended up writing the book. So that was a lot of fun. And then so at this point in my career, I really dedicate myself to saying, how do I bring the expertise about anticipating and adapting to change to audiences who can really help drive the innovation agendas of their companies? And so whether it's at the board level at the AICPA, whether it's with my startups who I advise on their early go-to-market strategies, or to audiences like this, it's very fun and gratifying and a nice chapter in my career. So, as I said before, in my corporate digital and innovation career, I really came to value, as did my team, the partnership with our finance colleagues. And I think, on the one hand, we were lucky because I worked in big organizations, and we were able to seek out and find sort of the self-selecting people who said, well, I have this great basket of finance skills, but I'm not interested in just verifying and approving and counting and going through the normal motions of the planning function. I really want to, alongside that traditional skill set, I want to help the company plot the road to the future. And we were very lucky to partner with those people. But also, it took my team to recognize that we needed to reframe our perception of what the finance people were all about, right? Because I know there's all kinds of, every function in business comes with their baggage. Innovation people are the people wasting the company's money, and marketing people are an expense, and finance people are the people who say no. So we had to set that aside and really reframe, how can these people help us? Because we really need them, because they really understand how the business makes money. And if we want to change that through an innovation, we need to really get into those levers at a very deep level. And when you're in the kind of the kind of business I was in, which was banking, we were trying to innovate a $5 billion P&L that represented 25% of Citigroup's earnings. You cannot mess around. You got to deliver the goods. And so it was very important to develop that relationship. And that's a lot of what I come to this with. And we realized that having that partnership and collaboration was truly important to our success. So what are we going to talk about today? A couple of things. First of all, I'm going to define what I mean by innovation. Innovation is probably one of the most misunderstood words in the lexicon of business. So at least want to put out the definition that I like and I tend to use, and that all of my, when I say the word innovation, you'll know what I mean. Talk a little bit about how you can connect your historical mandate and your skills to the new demands of your business, and then talk specifically about your leverage points. And I'm going to present 8 different areas of leverage where I think you can really make a difference. So before we start, I'm going to ask you, we're going to do some polls, and there's actually 3 questions coming up. So I hope you'll go to your app or go to your browser, and your answers really matter because this is a little bit of a data gathering exercise for my colleagues and I to understand your needs and what you're really feeling. So the first question is, to what extent do you see innovation as important to your business's strategy and plans? Okay, settling in. So that's great. Virtually everybody here and in our virtual audience sees innovation as either extremely important or important to their business. Hopefully, there's a couple of people in the green bar who don't see it as important. Hopefully, we'll win you over by the end of this presentation because indeed, I don't think it's possible for any business to not have an innovation agenda as part of their desire to stay relevant as their customers' needs, as their customers change. But I'm not here to convince you. Okay, next question. To what extent do you personally currently play a role in your business's innovation strategy and plan? So you're going to choose one of A, B, or C, and then one of D, E, or F. So you're very someone or not involved, and what's the level of your involvement? Okay. This is really interesting. So you've got a lot of people here. Most people have some level of involvement. About a third of you would like to be more involved, which I find very interesting. Somebody wants to be less involved, so I'd love to hear about that. And some people are not involved at all. But you see there's definitely a concentration of people who are involved and actively involved. So that's great. Now, the last question for now, we're going to form a word cloud on this. So this is going to be a question that requires you to put in a couple of words. And what you want to do isn't just 1 or 2 words, ideally, because it's going to form a word cloud. So try to be as concise as possible. What do you see as the biggest barrier to innovation in your business? By the way, you're welcome to input questions in the app. So I know Ken is watching the question flow, and we can either take questions during the program or we'll have time at the end. So if anything's coming up, I just encourage you, especially in light of these are very interesting answers. So there's a real coalescing around a core set of issues that this group is experiencing. And by the way, none of them are surprising, right? Change, which is, I assume, fear of change and the challenges of change. The cost, how do you invest in innovation? Management and leadership, yeah, those people at the top sometimes don't really know what's going on. And I was one of them, so I know what you mean. How do you get the resources? Resistance, which I think goes into change and leadership. I read resistance is also culture. Upper, maybe that's upper management. Well, time. So this is not a surprising list. You're sort of in with the pack, and they're all things that are surmountable. So to a point. So maybe I'll give you some ideas on those today. So came across this headline in an article that somebody shared with me, and this is a real headline. It was in the Daily Mail just about 20 years ago, a UK publication. Internet may be just a passing fad as millions give up on it. So I don't know if anybody remembers this kind of headline, or maybe you remember, as I do, a very distinct memory of being in the office. I think it's when I was at American Express, and Bezos had just launched Amazon as a bookstore, saying he was going to build the world's largest store, and people were sort of deriding him. People thought that Bezos was crazy, and he may be. And he still publishes to this day his shareholder letter. Every year he publishes his original shareholder letter with his annual report to remind people. But this was real. You know, Amazon was left for dead. It was a stock at one point that was trading under $10 right now, one of the world's richest companies. So what happens? So the reality is that it's human. We have a very hard time accepting a different reality than the one that is familiar to us, right? So we tend to really discount things that don't fit in to our frame of reference. Or we're so rational. And you guys are like the ultimate rational people, right? You say, well, how much money is it going to make? And what's the ROI? And what's the net present value? And the discounted cash flow? And what's the cost of capital? And all that stuff. And how much money are we going to make in 5 years? And so really, really rational. And when you start to do those analyses at the forefront of a new idea, one of two things happens. Either the numbers are so bizarrely large, they feel like no chance. Or they come out to zero because you don't really know. So everybody writes zero. Or like my finance team did back in the day. They just, we don't believe in numbers, so we're just going to come in half. So we tend to walk away from things. And, why do I share this with you? Well, a little bit, it certainly is a memorable quote. But as we come to the end of this conference, think about all the things that have happened. Think back to 2 years ago, just this time, right? October, November 2019. And now think about what's happened in the course of the last couple of years, not just around the pandemic, but robotics, space tourism, advances in artificial intelligence, the fact that we really are engaged in cyber warfare. Who ever heard about a war without weapons, right? Or a different kind, with virtual weapons. All the things, the fact that, 95% of Americans would like to quit their jobs. These are things that would have been unthinkable to most of us 2 years ago, but they have all come to pass, and they are very real. And so the question is, how can we avoid being the author of this kind of headline a couple of years from now, but not engage in, the answer is not throw things against the wall and see what sticks, right? The answer is not bet the bank. The answer is not invest huge sum of money in doing things that are speculative. So how do you manage what you have to do now, but also prepare yourself for the possibility that there could be radical change very quickly? And how do you personally, as finance experts, play a role in helping your business to get that to happen?
Amy,
Yeah.
we do have we've got a couple of questions here,
Sure.
and I think it's to this point about the passing fad and the mindset. So it's how do we overcome the "but we've always done it that way" mindset, and it has made it successful. Why change? And the other one that follows it up is, how would you explain that reaching for the stars with innovation isn't always the best method, and small steps can be better?
Yeah.
So I don't know if
But
you'll
when I
touch
get
on
into,
this now
so on
or
that latter
later.
one,
Yeah.
when I get into the definition of innovation, there's, and I'll comment on this, there's two, the innovation can be incremental or disruptive, right? We think about disruptive, which if you look up disruptive in the dictionary, it means to destroy what's there, right? So that might not make too many of your CEOs very comfortable. It probably doesn't make you very comfortable. But, when I was in credit card business at Citi, and we had over 50 million customers, if we got people to give up their paper statements, which was pretty incremental and unsexy, at $6 a pop for the year, that was worth a lot of money. That was like pretty sexy to the CFO. So there's much that is possible that is incremental. And in fact, I saw statistics some years ago that said generally, like, somebody had quantified, and this may be somewhat out of date, but interesting number, 92% of the value of innovation created by established businesses is incremental. But it still requires a strategy and a plan. Now, how do we avoid this is the way we've always done it? Well, yes, people will say that. And what got you here won't get you there. What worked in the past is not going to work for today's customer, for today's competitive environment, and given the capabilities that are available. So I think that can be a hard attitude to overcome. I would say you very much need to understand ask yourself, are you in an organization where the CEO understands what got you here won't get you there? And start by looking to the guidance of the CEO to take the pulse. But then on an individual basis, I feel like everybody is a leader. There's leader with a capital L and leader with a small l, and we can all be leaders with a small l. And small l leaders mean when you're in a meeting and somebody says to you, oh, we've always done it that way, it's like, well, let's think about doing this. Let's conduct a test, or how about this, or what makes you think that? So this whole thing about asking questions is one tactic to dig into the customer. We can go very deep on that topic today. There's a point where you've got to size up. Are you in an organization where the entire organization is marching to, let's repeat the past? And that might not be a good career bet, frankly, at the risk of saying something that might make you uncomfortable. I think we all, if you want to have a viable career and be employable, we all need to be associated with companies that understand that they've got to be constantly redefining what they're doing for the future. And that it's not an either or, it's an and. People tend to, I had many, many debates in banking with my colleagues about long-term or short-term. And I think it's both. It's both. I think real leaders and really great executives understand that there's an accountability to deliver to shareholders the near-term results and build bridges to the future. And oh, by the way, Wall Street, for those of you who work for publicly traded companies, Wall Street rewards growth. Wall Street looks at forward-looking earnings. So rationally, if you want to build the equity value of your business, you've got to be investing in innovation. So hopefully I'll give you some other ideas on the answer to that question in the rest of the talk. But it is sort of the mother of all questions on this topic. So I said I wanted to start by defining innovation. And innovation is not about cool stuff, although it can be cool. Innovation is not about technology, although often technology is an enabler. The point of view that I always promote about innovation and that I think can set any business up for success is that innovation is the process of identifying and developing and scaling viable solutions that meet the real needs of real people. So let's unpack that. First of all, innovation means something new, right? Nova is the Latin root of new. Could be new to the company, new to the market, new to the sector, new to the geography. Could be new to the world, new to the customer segment. So there's many, many different definitions. There's many ways that new can manifest itself. It doesn't always have to be you're the first one who landed on planet Earth with this concept. Viable solution. Viability should be a big concern of this audience, right? It can be executed. There is a legitimate business model, or we're willing to test our way towards a legitimate business model. It's legal. It meets all the regulatory requirements. We can find the talent to deliver. The technology exists. So all the elements of viability, really important, because otherwise you can't ever scale it. Real problems of real people. Maybe it's because I come from a marketing background. Maybe it's because of all the time I spent working in Harold's Pharmacy. I'm a big believer in listening to your customers and users and watching them to understand their real needs and making sure that there are real people out there who really have the need against which you want to develop an innovation. And that is really important to your perspective because the starting point for building a viable business is making sure that there's a total addressable market who wants what you're developing. So now, oftentimes when we talk about innovation, we automatically gravitate to what? Product. Now, it's interesting. Turns out that product innovation on its own is one of the weakest forms of innovation. Now, why is that? Well, because given the cost of technology, easy access to capital, et cetera, very easy to copy, right? So new products can be copied with incredible speed. And I'm not talking about sophisticated, like pharma, stuff like that, but innovation, product innovation can be copied. A resource, there's actually 10 types of innovation. So you can innovate your customer experience, your brand, your internal processes, you can innovate your business model. There's many, many different types of innovation. And the most defensible type from a competitive perspective are types of innovation that bundle all of those together. So one of the things that makes Apple so great is Apple innovates their brand, they innovate the experience, they innovate their technology, they innovate their products, and it's very hard for a competitor to come in and really assault that, right? And so if you want to learn more about this, I put in the margin a very interesting resource, a book called The 10 Types of Innovation. You can also grab a copy for free off the internet. Larry Keeley, who's now, he has been for a number of years the global head of Deloitte's innovation practice. I was very blessed to have Larry be my innovation mentor at Citi when my boss first told me that I had to go figure out how to make the business more innovative. So I was really lucky because I got like one of the best people on the planet, literally, to teach me. But really admire his work. And it's very mind-expanding to realize that there are many ways to innovate, not just product. So here's the thing. Innovators always face curveball moments. But we in the business world tend to want to dodge the curveballs, control for the curveballs, somehow avoid the curveballs. But innovation is all about curveballs. And I'd be willing to bet that in this group, except for sometimes throwing curveballs for the sake of internal politics, which of course none of you would ever do, innovators are involved in a lot of curveball moments. And that's another area where they really need your help. And what's the lesson? Well, the methods that you're used to as finance executives and finance professionals for making risk-based decisions to get around the curveballs can unwittingly completely kill innovations and certainly demoralize the people in the organization who are accountable for trying to figure out how to get this to happen. And so that gets to a point that I'm going to talk about a lot, which is, your mindset that you bring to it too. And the curveballs that innovators face can be approached with new approaches. And that's the 8 recommendations that I'm going to take you through today. And the fact is that the lessons are hiding in plain sight. So I have this CEO at Citi, Ajay Banga. He's now the chairman of MasterCard, so a very, very successful global executive, another person I was very, very lucky to work under during my corporate career. And Ajay used to say, you have to steal shamelessly. And of course he meant ethically, right? He was not suggesting to go out and steal. But the fact is, we get into like a track of where we go to get information, where we go to get advice. We tend to stay in our own little, silo professionally and in our organization. And if you open your mind to new sources of learning, like listening to somebody like me, for example, I'm probably, an unusual source of learning for you, you can really start to pick up the pace and open yourself up to totally new ways of doing things if you weren't than you have been by approaching how you figure things out in the old traditional way. And I think the problem is that we get very caught up in our belief systems about how things should be done, right? We've always done it that way, right? So that is such a rut. And I guess the reason I ended up going the career path that I pursued was all you have to say to me is you can't be done. And I'm like, oh yeah? I'm going to figure out a way. It's very hard to stop me. But that's a terrible rut to be in. We've always done it that way. Okay, that's okay. And let's see what else is going on out there. How are other companies solving this problem? How are startups solving this problem? Does this problem exist in other sectors? At one point, my team, we were looking for new ideas for credit card products. We started studying the weight loss industry because I think people manage their weight the way they manage their money, badly, right? They have aspirations, and then everybody wants to save for retirement, and most Americans don't have a retirement plan. We have an obesity problem in this country, and we have, and people don't lose weight. So we started studying the weight loss sector. And so being willing to look for those lessons that are hiding in plain sight, just by breaking out of we've always done it that way, and now I'm going to go look for some new ways, is very, very, it's a very helpful tactic. So now we're going to get to the meat of this. Where is finance's leverage? I'm going to go through each of these points in detail, so we don't spend a lot of time on this page, but it's customers, portfolio strategy, how you think about resources, policies and processes, which we've already touched about, metrics, which is a favorite topic of mine, your tool set, what you're doing about diversity, and all of which is only possible if you choose to have a growth mindset. And I'll talk about what it really means to have a growth mindset. So here's some remarkable statistic that I came across last year. A group of researchers did a study of 400 CEOs on how they spent their time. And they literally analyzed their calendars. And amazingly, shockingly, disappointingly, they came back and discovered that CEOs only spent 3% of their time with customers. Now, how many of you want to bet that those CEOs are all telling their team that the most important thing is to put the customer at the center of everything they do? And how would you feel if you knew the CEO of a company that you were giving a lot of your money to, or were really relying upon, was spending 97% of their time on something other than you? That wouldn't make me feel too good. And the thing is, spending time with customers and understanding the customer's perspective directly is not something that just belongs to marketing or sales or customer service. It belongs to everybody in the organization. You know, I used to get so irritated in meetings where people would talk about, like, who owns the customer. Like, nobody owns the customer. The customer owns us. They decide where they're going to, when they're going to pull their money out of their wallet and who they're going to give it to. And everybody has a responsibility, and especially you, to really find ways to get closer to the customer. So whether that is, and I don't mean just reading reports. Like it's one thing, all right, get the report, that's great. Look at the data, look at the NPS score. That's not enough. It's qualitative insight. It's sitting in on the focus groups. It's participating in, in other things that marketing or your R&D team are doing, user labs. You just have to ask. I remember at one point when I was Chief Innovation Officer for E-Trade, and we were doing in-home interviews right after the financial crisis, and I was actually going into people's homes with an ethnographer and talking to families about how they were what they were doing with their money post-financial crisis. And there was an opportunity for one of my colleagues from the other functions to come. And they were all afraid to come. Nobody wanted to. And I was like, that's crazy. So find ways to just get closer to your customers and get direct qualitative insight. Again, it's not the domain of marketing. It's everybody's responsibility. And to really understand not just rationally why people buy your product, but emotionally, what's their connection to your brand. Okay, so that's number one, spend time with customers. Number two, I'm sure in all of your lives, personally and definitely professionally, if you're saving for retirement, you probably have some kind of portfolio diversification strategy, or your financial planner has told you why a diversified portfolio is a good thing and it reduces risk. One of the things that I find takes down the temperature on people's anxiety about innovation in the business is to really approach what you're doing as a portfolio of bets. So different innovations, if you think about what I've said already, incremental versus disruptive, many types, innovations are going to have different degrees of when they pay off, how much they pay off, whether they ever pay off. And some may generate learnings that lead you to the next thing, and they will have different degrees of risk. So one of the tactics that I've seen used that can be very successful is you actually start to plot on a matrix, what's the state of our innovation portfolio? And it usually takes a couple of matrices, because you can't get, otherwise what I'm referring to, all the examples I've given would be like 3 or 4 dimensions, starts to give people an understanding of what's going on. And it also helps you see where you're weak, right? So maybe you don't have enough incremental short-term bets. Maybe you have nothing that's longer term and a little higher risk. And you need that. You need to fill out your portfolio. But taking a portfolio view of how your business is managing innovation and the individual, and looking at them as a set of initiatives, not just a single project. And this can be hard because there may be different things going on in different parts of the company, so you got to break down the silos to get all the stuff onto one matrix. But it's very helpful, and it literally gets people on the same page. It's a very useful conversation to have in the C-suite. I don't know a CEO who wouldn't value this kind of conversation. Okay. The third recommendation is to address the issue of scalable, of adapting and redesigning your processes. Now, so I have to tell you a story here that'll really hopefully make the point. So one of my teams, this was also in the credit card business, we decided we wanted to work with a startup company. We did a lot of startup technology licensing. And there was a particular company that had a capability that we believed would give our cards preference for e-commerce transactions. And very important, the average American carries like 7 credit cards. So if you're in that business, the whole idea of preference, how do you get to be the card that gets used by the person who's going to pay you back, is a big deal. And so we saw the rise in e-commerce sales, and we really thought this was going to be a very great capability that would give us a very differentiated customer experience. So we worked out a deal with the startup company. We put together all of our plans. We figured out what it would cost to do a pilot. All we wanted to do was a pilot. And it was like time to go to procurement. So send the manager off to procurement to start going through the procurement process. They come back a couple of days later, and they said, Amy, really sorry, but procurement says we can't do this project. I was like, well, why not? We just spent 3 months working on this with the vendors. Well, because the company loses money. They looked up the D&B, and the company loses money. So we can't work with a company that loses money. So I'm like, okay, so hang on, no kidding. So I'm sure there are people here who have been involved with startups, early stage startups, lose money. They plan to lose money. Why? Because they get a few $1 million from their investors, and they spend all their money on 2 things: sales and building out their technology roadmap so they can stay ahead of the competition. And that's how it is. And so we eventually got through. We actually did the test, and the test was actually not successful. So we learned a lot, so that was okay. But what do you do in that case? The way we managed to get on track was we said, okay, so we've got this very robust vendor management process and very robust set of screening criteria for vendors designed to protect us from risk. I say, okay, in the case of this little pilot with a couple of thousand customers where we're spending $50,000 on a business that earns $5 billion, let's talk about the risks and what's the problem we're really trying to solve. Okay, number one, $50,000. Okay, we'll account for that in our budget. So we can always write it off, and that's R&D. Great businesses invest in R&D, and we're willing to invest $50,000 out of our $5 billion in doing this. Okay, well, what about the customers? Well, if we have to pull the product back, we'll send the customers a very nice letter explaining that they were part of a pilot. We really appreciate they're interested in it. We'd love to get their feedback, and we'll be back with other solutions. We value your loyalty. Okay, fine. Is there a regulatory issue? No, there's no regulatory issue. All the disclosures are going to be appropriate and all that because, when you're in that lending business, regulation, big deal. So it all comes down to this issue of the way we've always done it. You have this industrial strength procurement process, and that's just one example that is fine if you're bringing in a vendor whose technology is going to be embedded in the entirety of your business. But it's like trying to kill an ant with an atom bomb to apply the same process to this little $50,000 pilot. And so this is very important, and this becomes one of the biggest impediments to innovation in established, successful businesses. We've always done it this way. It's like, okay, fine. This use case is different. So let's think about the problem we're trying to solve and what are other solutions to address the issues behind where this procurement policy came from that will still allow this idea to breathe and have some life. Okay, so I said before, metrics, one of my favorite topics. And it's a quote from me. One of the surest ways to potentially kill a great innovation is by imposing the metrics of a mature business on a nascent concept. So I have another story I want to share with you. And this was when I was very young in my career, back at American Express. We were working on some new idea, way ahead of its time, that had to do with delivering personalized messaging on customer statement. And this was before digital statements, so we were really way ahead of our time. And people actually read their bills. So it's a very valuable communication. You can really attract people's attention because they read their bill. So we were focusing on this, and we went to the president of the division with our Excel spreadsheets, taken out 4 decimal places to the right of the zero, 5-year NPV, how much money we were going to make, how great this was. And then he started laughing at us. So he really likes to be laughed at by the division president. And, this is a guy I really respect. I was like, what's wrong? He says, Amy, never imply a level of precision that has absolutely no basis in fact. So for something that's completely untested and unproven, this is ridiculous. You're wasting your time. Okay, so what do you do? Well, as I got a little better at the innovation game and figured out what to do, fast forward, to about 8 or 10 years ago, started having conversations with my new CEO when we were coming up with new concepts. We would think about it the way a startup company thinks about it. They start with, there's a whole chapter on business model design in my book, so I'm very interested in this topic because it's so important. How big is the total addressable market? And how do you know that? And it's not how many people have this need, but how many people can you access? How many people can afford to buy your product? I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with a founder because I'm a member of an angel investing group, and he came in with something that indeed there was a huge total addressable market, but based on data that I've seen, most of the people cannot afford the product. So boom, you're done. So there are metrics that are incredibly robust and appropriate, and they would make your heart sing because they are numbers that you can put in a spreadsheet, but they're more early indicators of potential. So total addressable market, you can maybe look at analogies. Well, what do people pay for this? So maybe they would pay for that. What are the margins for a similar product? So maybe this would, And then we used to do something that we called the 1% test, or what would you have to believe? This is my CEO's favorite question. What would you have to believe to earn 1% market share? And 1% is very hard to earn. Like that's actually it's hard to penetrate a market and get 1%. So we would have the what would you have to believe conversation around metrics that made sense for an early stage concept. But to say, figure out the ROI on some brand new thing, it's just like, don't waste your time. You can't, it's an innovation killer. There are many better ways to do it. And the lessons are all in what, a lot to be learned from startup companies on how they do this. The way they control the risk is run very small tests. So you really limit your capital exposure by making your testing as small as possible. And you're investing. And that's how you manage to roll the ball forward. Okay.
Amy, before you move on, I noticed a couple things on that last slide that caught my eye based on this question. And the question is, how would you explain that the question is, how do you suggest the most effective way would be to connect with customers? Online surveys, in-person by sales division. That's how do you connect customers, and it caught my attention.
So how do you get the customer insight?
The pink slips on the back of your last slide had some of the ways in which you kind of identify.
So how do you get the customer insight? I mean, I hate to sound like a consultant because I'm not, but it depends. But certainly, depending upon the business that you're in, I like nothing more than actually talking to some potential customers and having a conversation where they're doing 80% of the talking, not you. Right? So you're not there to tell them how great you are. You're, oh wow, how did you think of that? What's it like? And having a conversation, ideally, in their environment. So I know that's been hard because of COVID, but a couple of years ago when I was at AICPA, I went out on sales calls with one of the sales guys, and we were visiting financial planners. And we went into this planner's office, and on his windowsill were like 3 mountains of brochures from companies like ours. And I'm the marketing person. I'm trying to, I didn't care what he said. This guy did not need another brochure from us, right? He already was overwhelmed with useless communication. So that's the benefit of going into your customer's environment. And it's almost thinking like an anthropologist. Anthropologists go and study the environment. So it's very useful. But usability labs, if you're testing technology, your current customers, a lot of people I know, so many businesses are driven by, we've got to get new customers, but your current customers are the best source of input and insight. They've already made a decision to want to affiliate with your brand. So they are a rich source of learning. So have a breakfast roundtable. Have a Zoom coffee. Just, I think one of the unacknowledged needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the desire to tell you what I think. People love being asked their opinion. So there are very natural ways to pull people together to say, we're thinking about this, or how's this working for you? But then you have to keep asking, well, what made you say that? And why did that happen? And this is all in my book. It's actually a whole script about how to do that. But that's what you want to do. And I think that it's very important to marry qualitative with quantitative. We love quantitative. First of all, because you're finance people. But somehow we think quantitative is more true. I mean, I could fudge any business case if I wanted to and get people to feel better about it just because it's numbers. But you need the qualitative because it helps you understand the why and the motivation and what's really going on. And those qualitative insights have a huge impact on the levers of the financials. So it's important to understand them. So hopefully that's a starting point. Okay, so established businesses have a lot of tools, and you all have tons of tools, and you carry your tools around with you as you go from, career stop to career stop. And the thing is, established businesses are really good at banging away with their tools. And there's this saying, which I love, it's up here, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so back to my procurement example, they've got that hammer. And they are like slamming away at these poor little startups who are coming in. And it's the wrong tool, right? And so how do you expand your tool set? And I know this is a huge conversation at the AICPA. I think it's very critical, not just for the finance function, but it's even something, my daughter is a designer, my son is a software engineer. It's like constantly, how are you going to keep learning and expanding your tool set? Because it's going to constantly become irrelevant and out of date. But you've got to find the right tool for the job. And I think that's a big lesson for innovation in these companies, is when you take the old tools, as good as they were, you inadvertently kick the life out of things that might really have potential for your business. So finding ways around that is important. Okay, now I'm going to give my pitch for diversity. So look, I personally feel, and as a woman of a certain age, I am very sensitive to the fact that a lot of companies are still taking sort of a check-the-box approach to diversity, or they believe it's a matter of having like one of every type. I need a person of color, I need an Asian, I need a Latino, I need a woman, I need millennials because they know better. I mean, I have to tell you, as a woman, I've had people approach me about board roles, because I'm intermediate board. Oh, they want a woman. Do you know how insulting that is? Great candidates want to be hired because of what they can contribute to your success. Great candidates do not want to be tokens. And what's more important, although certainly people of different gender and age and ethnic backgrounds and country of origin can contribute a lot of diversity to the team, and it's important. What's really critical is diversity of thought, and it's not just the recruited. It's, are you sustaining and encouraging an environment where all voices are welcomed and listened to? And I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong as well. And this is not specific to the function. I see this every place. That a lot of effort on, let's recruit diverse people. Okay, that's great, we got it. And then, but the environment is not a nurturing environment where people feel comfortable, right? And so as you go down that path, you have to take both issues into account. It makes a huge difference. I can tell you that my team, one of the great things at Citi was that, at least back then, they were unbelievable at financing the recruitment of people from all over the world. I had a guy on my team who had fled. I was a Tiananmen Square defector. I had people from like 15 countries. And first of all, it made work a lot more fun. But people brought very different perspectives, because at least in the case of financial services, cultural attitudes around money are very, very different around the world. So it brought a real freshness to the dialogue that really helped us think better. Okay, last, and this is really, without this, it's hard for you to achieve all of the above. So this is very, very important, and I've alluded to this a little bit throughout the talk, this idea of having a growth versus a fixed mindset. So there's a researcher named Carol Dweck. She's a PhD. You could look her up online. She did research on this notion of a growth versus a fixed mindset. And what she found A fixed mindset is kind of when you think you've got the right skills and they do not need to change. When you are that kind of person, you are going to bring negativity and really defeat a team's ability to drive innovation. So it's very important to really figure out, like, where are you? And I think this is a career issue. Like, even if you're one of the people who doesn't want to be involved in innovation, okay, that's fine. For employability, for career vitality, the people who are able to strengthen their ability to have a growth mindset are going to have much more interesting and viable career opportunities. And they will be the players who can contribute to an organization advancing their innovation agenda. I love this quote from Confucius. Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fail. That's a growth mindset, right? Confucius had it even before Carol Dweck did her research. So we're going to do 2 more polling questions, but I really want, these are both word clouds, so really want your answers. The first one, again, is in just thinking about all of the above, everything we've talked about for the last little while. What are the top 1 or 2 challenges for you to act on today's recommendations? Or another way, what I'd rather hear you say is, where do you need help? Where do you most need help to get to the next step? So let's see what everybody has to say. Yeah, system's always a big one. For whoever wrote buy, I'm not sure what that means. So if you could, oh, buy in, thank you. Okay. This is great. You're giving me, I write a column periodically in Fast Company, and you're giving me great ideas on content to talk about. So you'll have to follow me on Fast Company, because I'm going to follow up and try to answer some of these questions. All right. Yeah. These are the walls that people run into. You know, in my book, I have a whole chapter on resourcefulness. And just to tell you a story that's really interesting, you know, coming out of the big corporate world, and again, going back to Citi, which is a company I loved, and they really, big reason I'm doing what I do is that I had the opportunity to drive this massive digital transformation there, which I never would have thought I would have done, but I got the opportunity, is that, oh, wait a minute, I lost my thought. It's funny, I lost my thought. Okay. All right, let's keep going. I had something smart that I wanted to say, and I lost it. Okay. These are all important. These are important issues, and they're all, oh, I know, I was going to tell you about resourcefulness. So when I was writing my book, I interviewed a founder, and his name is Drew Lakatos, and Drew was very interested in finding a way to prevent a high incidence of death in this country from senior citizen falls. And I don't know if you know, like that's like a major death category and severe costs. I mean, I have a 92-year-old mother who fell and ended up with knee replacement at the age of 90, so I've lived this nightmare. And so Drew decided he wanted to invent a device. It was kind of like an inflatable airbag that would, in that microsecond when it knew you were falling, it would inflate on impact and cushion your fall, so you wouldn't have a serious accident or, you know, or God forbid, die. And this is a very, imagine getting approval on a medical device is a pretty big deal, and it's a very expensive, time-consuming process. So Drew had to build a prototype to convince his investors, to convince his first angel people to give him some money to develop a POC so that he could go to the appropriate healthcare provider to do it. And so what he did, and Drew is a guy in his 40s with 4 children, supporting a family, so he's not like Mark Zuckerberg back in college. He actually had financial obligations. One Saturday morning, he went with his son to an auto junkyard and cut out airbags from cars, airbags that weren't like bloody and messed up, and took them to his tailor with bicycle inner tube and was able to mock up enough of a proof of concept that he was able to get some angel investors to write him a check. So this guy completely reframed my idea of what it takes to get stuff done. Because in my old days, I would say at Citi everything was like $200,000, required 9 months and 16 layers of approval, but it was mostly like you needed so much money to get something done. And this guy was incredible. By the way, his business became a very successful business. But this notion of resourcefulness, and again, it's breaking out of the way we've always done it, like, well, how can I take a tiny step forward to prove my concept? That's a founder mentality. So just something to think about. I love that story. Okay.
All right, we do have a question here that sort of relates to that concept of resources. How do we convince CEOs and other executives to support us with resources as we move toward value partners? How do we get executives to support us with resources as we move towards value partners?
Right. So how to get resources in the finance team?
Yeah, I guess.
I think you have to make the case. That's actually one of the other things I didn't say about resources. Innovation doesn't happen on an annual budget cycle. So I think something else to think about is like, you can't just say, come back next year. That's not how the market moves, guys. So, but resources, it's you say, I want to do a POC. I want to do a proof of concept. So you could say, you go with your case. I'm seeing the opportunity to do this. Here's how it would benefit you, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, and the business. I'd like to take 20% of my time, or I'd like to, one of our first projects at Citi was we glommed onto the summer interns. I got them to work on a project. So, but it's how do you make your pitch? And the important thing is you have to think about not what you want, but what's going to make your CEO successful. So what are they worried about? What are they talking to analysts about? What is their problem? And how can you help solve their problem? And what would a little teeny tiny POC be? And how would you measure, and how would you evaluate the success of your POC? So I think that's how you need to approach it.
Great. I guess on this question, based on some research that I've recently done with AICPA and SEMA, have you seen companies sort of do carve-outs of their budget so that they've got sort of a fund of innovation, resources that sort of get outside of the regular budget cycle, which is sort of fraught with all kinds of difficulties?
Yes, I think companies that handle this better have a governance process for innovation where the CEO obligates everybody in the C-suite to commit to, there's a governance process for innovation, and there might be a separate, a pool of resources that are available. I realized the CFO kind of controls the purse strings. And so I saw from my team to get any place, we built a very close relationship with the CFO, and I would chat with him all the time about what my team was doing, let him have input on our tests, so he knew. Also, don't surprise people. If there's something that you think is important, the worst time to bring it up is at budget time. You have to kind of be in the conversation flow, setting the expectation that something's coming down the pike, because there is always a way to find the money to get something started. I really believe that. So I think having separate money is okay. What's more important to make that effective is having a defined governance process. I always admired Procter & Gamble. I don't know if they still do this, but I actually dragged my CEO from Citi on a plane ride to visit Procter & Gamble years ago. They have this Breckenridge Innovation Lab, and there is a whole process for managing the development of new products and customer experiences and services that is governed at the top of the house by the CEO, and they have an Innovation Governance Council, and where they focus time. It's not like an agenda at the weekly management meeting. They have quarterly reviews. It's a whole discipline process to it that people are committed to. So to me, that model is like the gold standard. But there are steps you can take, and you may not need the gold standard for your organization to work, but money, governance, really important. Okay, so something I really like that I use a lot is this model called the start, stop, continue model. And I don't know if anything it's run into, but it's a really great way to get people to make commitments. So you think about something you would start to do, something based on everything we've heard. Is there one thing you would start doing that you don't do already? One thing you would stop doing that maybe now you realize is maybe not really so helpful to the innovation cause and you're willing to let go of it? Or one thing that you think like, wow, this actually is helpful and I didn't even realize it, so I'm going to continue doing it. So in the next poll, what I'd like you to do is just make sure you put start, X, stop, put down, make sure you include the start, stop, continue word in your response. And I'm really, really interested to see what you have to say. There's no right answer. Stop settling. Hopefully it's stop settling. Start asking more. Yeah. You know, I didn't talk about listening, but listening is such a big deal. The listening and the ability to ask good questions is very, very key. Stop always saying yes. I thought stop always saying no. That's wrong. Stop procrastinating. I love that asking, listening, learning, thinking, action. That's great. That's great. Okay, that's really, really helpful. So one of the things I'm working on now, I said at the beginning that, I really am putting my full weight in this chapter of my career to really addressing this issue of helping leaders get access to practical tools and guidance on how to get from that seed of an idea to a viable, scalable commercial opportunity. And we actually just went into production. I went into production with a colleague of mine, Judy King, who's seen the picture of the blonde woman, on a Coursera program that we're going to release next year on innovation, demystified practical tools for finance professionals. So I'm really excited about that, and more to come when we get closer to actually releasing it, because I think this is important. This was kind of the condensed 1-hour presentation view, but there's a lot to dig into in terms of actually teaching and helping learners actually move forward and take action and absorb some of the skills and competencies that I've been presenting here. So I hope you enjoyed this. It's always a lot of fun I have so many great memories of all the crazy things I worked with my finance colleagues on over the year, and love my association with AICPA and SEMA. You can find me, where did my thank you button go? You can, if you want, I love staying connected with people. I'm a real connector. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can email me, amy@amyradin.com. You can go to my website, which is amyradin.com. You can give me your business card. I can give you my business card, whatever you'd like. But if you have found this helpful and you want to have any kind of a follow-up and understand more, it would be my pleasure. So thank you all, and safe journey wherever you're going.